I think Sean set me up for this, but let me just say, if there's any doubt in this room, I smoke pot and I like it a lot, okay? I'm a 69-year-old lawyer edging up to the big 7-0. I think I've been smoking pot since 1965 when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School. Hate to say, I think that's 48 years, so I guess it's fair to say I'm a regular smoker now. And the point I want to make is there's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults, and it's none of the government's business whether you smoke or why you smoke. Yeah. My first two comments are reflected that I'm a stoner. I've been smoking a long time, and a lot of you people have too. I'm then going to get into a little bit about the fact that we have to appeal to the non-smokers too. So we want to be careful about that. But initially, let's acknowledge it. What we all know, and anyone who's ever smoked marijuana knows, it enhances your appreciation of good food, of good music, and of good sex. And those are not bad things. But it does more than that for most of us. In my case, I can assure you that when I smoke marijuana, it allows me to stand back a half a step and get a little better perspective on life and on my job and on how relative important some things are and some things are not. I think in the right circumstance, marijuana smoking is not just not a bad thing, it is a very positive experience. And we need to develop the courage to say that out loud. We don't need to be apologetic about smoking marijuana as long as we do it in a responsible manner. And we're serious about that. If you haven't seen it, go to the NORML website and take a look at something we call the Principles of Responsible Cannabis Use. We spent a long time working that up several years ago. In fact, I think we're going to be making some revisions at our upcoming board meeting. But because the majority of the public do not smoke marijuana, the one heavy burden we have, as we are winning, as the prior speaker said, there's no question we are finally winning this, we must make sure they understand that we take those responsibilities seriously. Now, I guess what I'd really say is, what a wonderful time to be alive if you're a marijuana smoker. Eric just pointed out, we founded NORML in late 1970. In 1969, Gallup poll, for the first time, asked Americans, do you support legalizing marijuana? They hadn't even thought to ask the question before then. It was just considered off the charts. 12%. That means that when we started down this road, we had 88% of the country against us. So it's not surprising, it was slow going. Now, we did not think it was going to take 4 decades plus, but it has, and that's all right, because we have finally won. Those polls that Eric showed, we started at 12%, and over a period of 4 decades, gradually got up to where, starting about 2 years ago, we now show that a majority of the American public, including the non-smokers, now oppose prohibition and support the full legalization of marijuana with controls and taxation. So we are winning this, not because we're more clever than we used to be, and not because we've come up with new arguments. Frankly, they're the same arguments we've been making for 4 decades. It is because we've outlived the bastards to a large extent. We knew eventually that would happen. I never had any doubt we would win because it was the old folks, my age and older, who were our opponents. They were the people who were largely brought up during the reefer madness generation. And if you've had your government tell you how bad marijuana is for all those years, it's hard to set that aside. But those older people are gradually stepping aside or dying and being replaced by younger people in positions of power and influence. And younger people grew up with marijuana. Whether they smoke or not doesn't matter. They have friends who smoke or they have family members. They know it is no big deal. So we knew we were going to win this thing. Frankly, I just wasn't sure I was going to live long enough to experience it. And I feel very fortunate to have done so. Those victories last year, you cannot overstate the importance. They totally changed the political debate in this country and worldwide, folks. I mean, other countries who who wanted to say something reasonable about ending prohibition were afraid to because of the U.S. and our incredible policy. Jamaica tried to legalize marijuana several times in the last 20 years. I was down there twice to testify, and they wanted to do it, but the U.S. threatened them with all kinds of loss of foreign aid and all kinds of programs that they benefit from. But when they see the U.S. starting down that road, all of a sudden, they realize now may be the chance. So we should all feel great satisfaction in that we are literally at the tipping point of this issue. I don't think there is any way that they will turn that back now. Now, I say that with a little caution because I do remember we thought in the 1970s, when we had first begun to decriminalize marijuana, Oregon was the first state in 72, and between 72 and 78, we had a total of 11 states where they stopped arresting marijuana smokers. And frankly, we thought we were pretty close to winning. We figured, 5, 6, 7 more years, we're going to have a whole country. We didn't realize sometimes the mood of the country can change. And what those Gallup polls showed, if you have a chance to look at those more closely, is starting at about 78 and 79, the mood of the country turned more conservative. Remember Ronald Reagan, remember Just Say No and Nancy Reagan, remember for the first time, but what about the kids? As if somehow adults should be limited only to conduct that's appropriate for children? If so, we couldn't ride motorcycles, have sex, get married, skydive, a whole hell of a range of things that people do in society we couldn't do because we don't want our kids doing. So that's a stupid standard to hold up. We agree one of the principles of responsible cannabis use is it's not for children. But we also have to recognize that for over 20 years, government does surveys every year about high school kids and their attitudes. And roughly 50% of the kids who graduate from high school have tried marijuana by the time they graduate. I'm surprised it's that low, frankly, but that's what the data shows. Some of them are probably lying. But even at that, of course kids are going to occasionally smoke marijuana, occasionally drink alcohol. They have to get an older ID, older friend's ID, or somehow get a fake ID. But that's the nature of being an adolescent. Fortunately, the vast majority of those people did not appear to hurt. They go into college and they have good careers and they get married and have kids. And my daughter, she's now 43, but when I first started NORML, she was at my feet all the time at NORML meetings, and I smoked openly at home in front of her. And I know that a lot of people think, my goodness, if you smoke in front of your kids, aren't they all going to be drug abusers? My daughter's 43, and she doesn't even smoke marijuana. She doesn't care about it. I think like most kids, she wasn't interested much in anything her parents did. So it's probably the best thing I could have ever done. I don't have to worry about it. When I go visit her now, I smoke with her husband. It's one of those So I alert folks that we didn't win a single statewide victory. After we won those 11 states in the 70s, the last was Nebraska in 78. We didn't win another state for 18 years, another statewide victory. We won a few city things and smaller efforts, but not a single statewide victory until 96, when California was the first state to legalize medical use. 18 years is a long time with no victories, guys. I'm telling you, about all you could do is keep your head low. And what we really fought on, they were trying to repeal the 11 states we decriminalized. I'm proud to say they did not succeed in a single one of them. So that all 11 of them, they weren't perfect states. Some of them had a civil fine, some had a criminal fine, but at least there was no arrest involved. You weren't threatened with jail. And those 11 states stayed with that, even during the difficult 80s. But as of 1990, the surveys started showing our support growing again, and it's been growing ever since, and it's increasing appreciably now. And with Washington and Oregon, of course, it now seems realistic. Legalizing marijuana to most Americans used to seem like a pipe dream, if I could use that on Congress. They thought it was a nice theory, but they weren't sure we would ever do it. You know, it was one of those things. Well, now they realize it is being done. The question is, do you want to still, do people in other states, neighboring states, want to continue to arrest their own children and treat them like criminals when the state next door is raising hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue? There's no apparent problem. Of course, once we demonstrate that legalization works well, I think there's no doubt that neighboring states will have enormous pressure to join and do the same thing. But that's also why it's terribly important in these next 2 years, and our colleagues in both Washington and Colorado know this, we must demonstrate that it does in fact work well, and we must recognize that it's not a time for a lot of public demonstrations. It's not a time for smoke outs. We don't need it. We just want. Smoke in private, follow the law, don't get stoned and get involved in accidents. Be careful with the impaired driving. That is a big issue. All the surveys show that matters to people. So the next 2 years will be incredibly important. I don't think we'll win any further states in the next 2 years for full legalization, because I think they're all going to be sitting there saying, how did it work in Colorado and Washington? And I don't blame them. I'm frankly, the same way. If I were a state legislator, I think I'd be inclined to say, well, let's just give it a couple of years and see how it goes. Now, I'm confident it will go well, and we will win that argument, but it is a wait-and-see period now for a lot of states. So let me talk about the role I see for NORML in the post-legalization phase. When I say post-legalization, I really mean now that we've started legalization. Obviously, it's not post-legalization in 48 states. We're still trying to get there. But the movement now has breached the prohibition that many people thought we could never end. Well, first off, if I may permit myself a few personal comments about the history of NORML, because it's relevant to the job of this organization over the next few years. I first smoked marijuana, as I said, when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School in 1965. I know they're proud that I say that. I make a point to say it as much as I can, because I'm certain they're proud of it. But in any event, it is true. I was a late bloomer. I was an alcohol drinker as an undergraduate, and I only got introduced to marijuana in law school. I was a draft debater. I graduated in '68. It was the height of the Vietnam War. And back then, we didn't even have a lottery. If you were a male and you were 18 years old, you were drafted and sent to Vietnam unless you were a full-time student. Well, let me tell you, that is one hell of an incentive to go to school. So everybody went to some college, almost everybody, because you're trying to stay out of Vietnam. I had a couple of fraternity brothers by that point had been drafted and sent back in pine boxes, and it was a scary time. And so for a whole generation of us, we were radicalized by the Vietnam War. In my own case, I went to see the Lawyers Guild, a wonderful group of lefty lawyers. They're still around, still do a lot of good work, but they were helping people who did not want to go to the Vietnam War. And when I approached them, they offered me 3 alternatives. The first and easiest one, they said, was probably they could connect me up with people in Canada, and I could leave the country, and they'd give me people to meet, so that I could start a new life in Canada. And there was some tradition of Canada playing that role in the unpopular wars in the U.S. The problem is there was no guarantee you could ever return to the U.S. And as much as I feared the war, I wasn't really prepared to never be back in my own country. So that was going to be my last result. If the choice was get killed or go to Canada, of course I'd go to Canada. The second, which was I was very tempted by, at the time, if you were gay in the military, before don't ask, don't tell, if you were gay, they wouldn't take you. So they had a team of psychiatrists in Baltimore that they offered to send me to, who would say I was gay, and I could stay out of the military. I thought that was pretty appealing. My wife did not like it at the time. And unfortunately, that marriage didn't last long. Yes? 2 minutes? Okay, I'll try to be fast. In any event, I ended up getting what's called the critical skills deferment. And I was allowed to work for a presidential commission at 16th and K called the National Commission on Product Safety. And it was considered bullshit, but it's considered important enough work that I didn't have to go to the war. Silly thing that I served my 2 years. Well, Ralph Nader had sort of created that commission. It was Senator Magnuson had created it. It was due to the work of Ralph Nader, the consumer advocate. So I spent 2 years working around Ralph and discovered this concept of public interest law, where instead of using your law degree to try to get rich, or even help private clients get rich, you use it to try to impact public policy. The policy I wanted to impact by that point was I wanted to legalize marijuana. So I started NORML as a consumer lobby. It always has been. And for a long time, people maybe didn't understand what that meant. But now we get close to legalization. Here's why it's important. I love people that grow marijuana, sell marijuana. I love the marijuana industry. If we didn't have marijuana to smoke, there wouldn't be any legalization movement. But when you get close to legalization, you must realize what consumers want is high-quality product that's safe, convenient, and affordable. We need to know there's no mold, there's no pesticides. We need to know the level of the THC and the CBD at least to be informed consumers. What the industry wants primarily, and there's nothing wrong with this, it's a free market system. They want to make money and get rich. That's what most people in business want to do. So there will be tensions. And the industry, because they have tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars involved, they're going to be well represented, and they are now in those discussions. What's terribly important is that consumers have a seat at that table. And in Colorado, I'm proud to tell you right now, when the governor set up this task force to recommend how to implement that law, we went to them as Colorado NORML said you should have consumers at that table. They agreed with us and asked us to pick somebody to sit on those guidelines. So our job over the coming years becomes almost more important because we got to make sure that the big tobacco companies don't come in. We want to make sure that they don't offer us mediocre grade marijuana or tax it so high or make it so inconvenient you got to drive 4 hours to get it. So there are lots and lots of important things we will have to do in the months ahead. Now, real quickly, we have to recognize this too. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of the country are non-smokers. And when we say that we have 56 or 58% support in the country, that's not pro-marijuana support. That's anti-prohibition support. And there is a difference. I'm a stoner, so I'm pro-marijuana. But it's not me you got to get, and it's probably not most of you we got to get. We got to get those 87% who aren't smokers. So it's terribly important when you're shaping your arguments and when you're shaping your public messages that you're looking at the issues that the general public is concerned about. And what our supporters told us when we lost in California, there were exit polling, the two things that bothered them mostly, actually the one thing that bothered them mostly was, one was the fear of big tobacco coming in, but the big thing was impaired driving. They're worried that they're going to have millions of newly impaired drivers on the highway. Now you and I know we're already on the highway, so you think we haven't been driving for the last 30 years? But that's not the answer they need. They need reassured that we agree. We don't want impaired drivers on the road either. We need to develop tests that are accurate for impairment, not just THC. Paul Armentano and NORML, most of you know, probably the world's best expert right now on the fact that you can't pick a .08 for marijuana like you can for alcohol because it's different in your body and it leaves your body in different ways. So we've got to reassure those 87% who don't smoke that their life is not going to be negatively impacted by the fact that they allow us to smoke marijuana. And we, for the moment, have won that battle, but we'll have to continue to reinforce that. I don't want to run too long, so let me just finally say that in the end, the battle is only incidentally about marijuana. It is really about personal freedom. And here's a quote from a Supreme Court case out of Texas a few years ago that I always thought has the best language I've ever seen from our Supreme Court. It was from Lawrence v. Texas. It was talking about the privacy provisions of the First Amendment and what they call the liberty interest protected by the Constitution. Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, said the following: "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. It is a promise of the Constitution that there is a realm of personal liberty which the government may not enter." So, as I said when I started, I'm a stoner, but the real important issue is not whether people smoke. I don't give a damn whether those 87% ever smoke or not. I do care that they represent and respect and protect that concept of privacy where government may not enter. Thank you all very much.